Wow, that escalated quickly, didn't it? Neil Harris, in one of probably the most surprising moves in the Championship managerial merry-go-round, has returned to become the manager of Millwall once again. And I say that escalated quickly. Only Monday, we were recording the Championship check-in podcast. We did a big segment on Joe Edwards and on Millwall. We've had a lot of conversation back and forth with the Millwall fans this past week. Are Millwall in serious danger of relegation? Well, James Berylson and the Millwall higher-ups obviously thought they were, because after a very fleeting short run, Joe Edwards is out of Millwall. Neil Harris is back in. Now, we spoke a lot about Edwards on Monday, and I'll put that clip up at the end of this show so you can kind of click back and check out that. So I do want to focus more on Harris, but I think we can now wrap this up on Edwards. And it's a shame because he's a young coach and you want to see people make their way in the game and get a chance. But it's turned out to be a disaster, hasn't it? Obviously, Gary Rowett was a long time Millwall manager. We've spoken time and again on this channel about the trouble a manager has in terms of coming in during a season and imprinting his style on a team. And where we see that manifest its absolute worst is when you take a team who are set up to be hard to play against, hard to beat, sort of pragmatic percentage football, which Gary Rowett was very successfully, I have to say, always buzzing around the playoffs in his time at Millwall. When you have that style and you try and go maybe with a lot of the same players to something far more expansive and, you know, progressive and passing and flowing and attacking and all that, it's a really hard transition to pull off, let alone in the same season without any transfer windows with the same player. And Joe Edwards, I suppose, falls into the same ditch hole. Sorry, excuse that language, as Wayne Rooney did. Tried exactly the same thing at Birmingham, didn't they? Where John Eustace had Birmingham set up to be hard to play against, hard to beat. Rooney comes in with the remit of no fear football, and that didn't go so well. And this hasn't gone well either for Millwall and Joe Edwards. And it really didn't smell good the last few games. Home games this past week, wasn't it? 4-0 defeat at home to Ipswich, 2-0 in a vital sort of bottom six clash. I say bottom six, we're in the bottom four now, Millwall. And they went under to Sheffield Wednesday, and that was it for Joe Edwards, who I wish well. We don't like to see young coaches get tainted. They do one job and that's it. They can never manage at that level again. It has to be lower or even nowhere. So good luck to him. And maybe wrong place, wrong time there at Millwall. So I know that's a fairly quick whistle-stop tour of Joe Edwards at Millwall. We've got to talk about Neil Harris, who returns to the club. Let's just go to the Millwall website and just read what Berylson and who's the head of football operations, Alex Aldridge, had to say. Neil is very excited, enthusiastic. Of course he is. Understands the club as well as anyone, knows what it's like to be successful here. Well, there you go. Why else would you bring the club's all-time top scorer and former manager, the manager before Gary Rowett, indeed. Aldridge adds in welcoming Neil back to the club, secured the service as a man with Millwall in his heart. He's been away and grown, experience and principles. Values remain the same. There's not a lot else other than in there. He knows the club. We know him. He loves the club. So I will say straight away, this does feel like an emotional hire, doesn't it? Let's get into, is this a good hire or a bad hire? Because essentially, Millwall are in trouble, aren't they? They've been very steady under Gary Rowett for a number of years, and they've tried something different. The something different hasn't worked. Fair play to them. If they've decided it's the wrong way to go, they've called it now and they've tapped out. But we are now in a situation, if I've done my right buttons there, where I can look at the bottom of the Championship table and you've got a Sheffield Wednesday side and the QPR side trending up Wednesday are 4 points off Millwall. QPR are 1 point off Millwall. There's 13 games to go. Millwall have 33 points. We don't know whether it's going to be a high tide. If QPR and Sheffield Wednesday keep moving nicely, it might be a high tide. You might need 48, 47 points rather than 45 or 44 to survive this season. Say it is 48 points. That's 15 points Millwall would need to get. And that is probably a high watermark, but certainly 4 wins is probably the target, and pick up some other points from draws in this last 13 games. Neil Harris has been brought in to keep Millwall in the Championship. So if it's an emotional hire, let me get emotional about this, because I loved Millwall under Neil Harris. When they first came into the Championship, Harris took them up from the playoffs from League One. And I did a lot of games down at the Den that season. They always seemed to be on a Friday night, and I was working in West London at that point, so I could get across and get to games really easily at Millwall. And I've got to admit, I did develop a bit of a crush on the club there. The fans were great to me. I love the atmosphere there at the Den. It's a unique place. And I really liked what I saw on the pitch, because it was a throwback. Everyone else was switching to 4-2-3-1 and splitting the centre-backs and bringing the full-backs forward at that point. Millwall played 4-4-2. They didn't care who they were playing against. It would have Morrison and Gregory up front, Jed Wallace, Aidan O'Brien, George Saville, Cooper, Hutchison, Romeo, Meredith. God, who was that dodgy goalkeeper? Oh, bless him. Sorry, I'll take that back. Archer, was it, in goal? And they had a right good crack at getting into playoffs. I think they went like 18 games or something undefeated towards the end of that season. And they didn't care who they were playing against. They played aggressive. They played front foot. They got the ball forward. They played fast. And if they lost, they lost. But they went down on their sword in typical Millwall fashion, fighting. That changed a little bit under Gary Rowett, didn't it? Where they became a bit more pragmatic, maybe a bit more savvy. You know, you tell me in the chat. But what I'm saying is I really enjoyed the style there at Millwall. And it feels like we've got 3 sort of styles now, and they need to try and take the best and avoid the worst from all of them. I don't really know what they take from Joe Edwards, because it just didn't work. It was supposed to be more expansive. Okay, you always want good expansive football in your armory in terms of, you know, nice, quick, slick passing, dribbling. Have they developed that at all under Edwards? I don't know. I really don't know. But if they can tap back in to the sort of defensive solidity and savviness and difficulty to play against, and ability to just draw and, you know, rack up enough points, which is what they need to do. A point per game always sees you right in the Championship. They didn't land on 46, weren't they, with a point per game at the moment. But if they can take that and maybe just sort of reinstill some of that up and at them 4-4-2 front foot aggressive football that Neil Harris had, okay, you might get a couple of beatings if you do it against the parachute teams. I think the first game's against Southampton, actually, at the weekend. But in home games against the non-parachute teams, maybe the bottom half teams, does that give you more chance than, say, a Joe Edwards side being a bit flaky and not really being able to do what he's asking them? Probably it does. So that's the big maximum upside, isn't it? That you bring back Neil Harris, this club legend, and he taps into what was great about Millwall when he was there the first time. I suppose it did end a bit sour, didn't it? I think the fans did turn a little bit on the football at the end, but I do remember it being pretty amicable. I think I was at his last game, actually, down the road here from where I live, down at Luton, in fact. And it felt like they managed to get out sort of amicably, and it was, look, I'm done. I don't want to go any further here. And the fans and everyone shook hands and moved on. Is my memory of it. Get in the comments if your memory of it's different. If you're a Millwall fan, you'll know better than me as an outsider. That's the whole positive spin on it. Here's the negative spin. It often doesn't work, the return. The manager who did well, who went away for whatever reason, and let's be honest, normally these people have either walked out on the club to go and do something quote, bigger and better. That wasn't the case. Or they've been sacked. They've mutual consent, whatever you want to call it. That is the case here with Neil Harris. I'm trying to think of examples. I can remember Mike Walker at Norwich going back, and after he'd sort of taken them into Europe and gone off and done the Everton job in the 90s. That didn't go well. The big one I can remember from a few years ago, and you'll think this is a stupid comparison, but it's not, is Dalglish at Liverpool. And when you think about it, obviously the levels of Liverpool and Millwall are very different. That's no offence to anybody. They just are, like it or lump it. But you essentially have a legendary striker who had a really good run managing the team that burned brightly and quickly and kind of ended how it ended, who's coming back in. And I don't know, does it ever work? That is my concern. Look, if you've got an example in the comments of somebody going back, so David Moyes at West Ham, he's had 2 goes, hasn't he? But I don't know, is it good for Millwall to be comparing there to a West Ham sort of manager comparison? My concern is that you don't go back and it doesn't work out. And if it doesn't work out, and we get a continuation of the trend from Sheffield Wednesday and QPR, and Millwall say Millwall pick up 10 points from the last 13 games, end on 43, could go down, couldn't they? And look, the league table is the league table, but a championship without Millwall in, I think, would be very much worse off for it. So I'm going to make a statement here that will sound trite, but I promise it's not. The best thing about this hire is it's an emotionally led hire. And the worst thing about this hire is it's an emotionally led hire. I think it's either going to work for that reason or it's going to fail for that reason. So that would be my take. I hope it works out. Sam Parkin will talk about this on Monday on the Championship Check-In. He was at Millwall on loan. He played with Neil Harris. I've met Neil Harris doing a game over at Wickham, and he was scouting. And to all intents and purposes, he seems a great guy who has a great energy about him, who everybody seems to like. So he's got the club legend status. I wish him all the best, and I hope for his sake and Millwall's sake that the emotional hire works out in the best way rather than in the worst way. And we have to be balanced about this. There are 2 sides to that particular sword. And with Millwall having no margin for error below them in the table, we know what the bad side of that equation is. Right, that'll do me. As I say, we talked a lot about Millwall on the check-in. We did a whole segment on them. So it's over to you now. Get involved down there in the comments. Don't feel the need to bury Joe Edwards. Look, it didn't work. Let's hope exercise empathy. Let's hope his professional ambitions can be met elsewhere. And wrong place, wrong time, wrong guy, whatever. Move on. Doesn't need to be any salt into the wounds of Joe Edwards, which is probably pretty raw today. But I'm really interested. Would you have brought back Neil Harris, club legend, former manager, all-time top scorer? And do you think it's going to work? Let me know in the comments. And if you want a bit more Millwall chat, I need you to click up there. It's a segment from the latest Championship Check-In podcast where Sam and I sort of illuminate a little bit more about Joe Edwards. Remember, Sam knows him from Chelsea as well. So I think a pretty good chat. And also in there, loads of great comments from Millwall fans, a few of them forecasting what has happened right now. And that is that Neil Harris is back in the dugout at Millwall. Who would have thunk it?